Dr. Doom doing the unthinkable in the Fantastic Four Unthinkable storyline is one of the greatest moments of Dr. Doom in Marvel Comics, and you will actually recognize a lot of moments from this story, even if you didn't necessarily know where they were from. So what this does is this initially opens up with Dr. Doom hunting for Valeria. Now, this is one of the things we have to specify here. A lot of you guys already know who Valeria Richards is from Marvel Comics, but there's also the original Valeria in Marvel Comics, the person that Valeria Richards is named after. So in Marvel Comics, Valeria was originally introduced in Marvel Superheroes issue number 20. It was written by Larry Lieber and Roy Thomas, and the idea was to basically expand out the origin story of Dr. Doom. And so what that story did is it introduced Valeria as the love interest of Victor back when he was part of the Romani camp back in Latveria. He ultimately ended up leaving her behind in order to pursue his grand ambitions of demonstrating to himself and the world that he was the greatest mind in existence. That kind of sent him down the path of becoming a villain. Within that story from Marvel Superheroes, he re-encountered Valeria during a whole scheme with a villain known as Diablo. Dr. Doom ended up dealing with Diablo, but Valeria offered him a choice, that he could leave the life of basically being an emperor behind, right, his life as Dr. Doom, and join her. But Doom didn't say anything, which really kind of told her everything she needed to know. And so she effectively walked away from him, presumably forever. And so what this story does is it taps into that idea. Now, Dr. Doom is traveling from one Romani practitioner of magic to another. But all in all, it doesn't really yield any results at all. For the most part, it just kind of feels like he's going to see a bunch of people who are essentially scam artists. And there's no real indication anyone can give him what he's looking for, which is the location of Valeria. Now, it does do a little bit of recapping in the idea of Dr. Doom and Valeria's relationship. Truth to tell, while this does do some emphasis there, I actually invite you to check out the video that we did on the Books of Doom, which really kind of builds on this story as well as the information from Marvel Superheroes number 20, a lot of the origin stories of Doom, and kind of consolidates them together into one comprehensive origin for his character. The long and short of it is that he and Valeria were in love, and honestly, the world was their oyster in a lot of ways. But again, his journey ended up taking him away from her. Now, it wasn't simply just him leaving and going to the United States. His obsession with magic, getting revenge on the Baron for the death of his father, understanding the kind of black magic and sorcery his mother was involved in, it became all-encompassing and obsessive, to the point that Valeria just didn't really have a major place in his life. So truth to tell, him taking off to the United States was really kind of the definitive official "I am leaving you behind," where she had emotionally been feeling it for quite some time. And so ultimately, he ends up tracking a woman down, which is kind of interesting in this conversation that they have, because one of the things she tells him is that we are not all frauds. And Victor's kind of caught off guard by that, right? The fact that she really seems to know exactly what she's talking about. And she kind of clarifies here. She says, the woman you seek is there, just down the street. And Victor, she is waiting for you. Valeria's been waiting for him this whole time, not in the sense that she was hoping he would come back to her. In fact, she doesn't really want to have anything to do with him. In fact, when he arrives here, she pretty much says that, right? You were not supposed to find me. And that's where Victor says, you impress me with your choice of refuge. You knew my contempt for the United Kennel of America would keep me away. And he says, Valeria, I mean you no harm. I bring but a simple offering I have treasured since long ago. And I need you to have it. It's a peace offering. And in fact, it's a necklace that has an image of the two of them, something that he was given when they were very, very young. And initially it kind of catches her off guard because it's an emotional gesture. And where she asks, dear God, were we really that young once? That Victor says yes, but only one of us was foolish. And he says, Valeria, I love you. Please come back to me, right? A declaration of love. Very unheard of for Victor Von Doom. But Valeria just asks, to who, Victor? To the callow boy who tumbled through the autumn leaves? He no longer exists. His place has been taken by a despotic chalice of evil with a name good men can barely whisper. Again, hearkening back to Marvel Superheroes number 20. And he says he's not here, and he never need be seen again. And he says, Valeria, I come to you without armor, without protection, and without any desire to endure one more day as the man I became once we parted. And he says, when we were young, I made a fateful choice, and it led me down a path I now regret. I want to choose again. And she kind of rejects him initially, right? Yet again, she says, I can't help you, Victor. The love I had for you is gone. And so he becomes the most vulnerable he can be with any one particular person. He reveals his face. And that's really kind of a way in which Victor comes to you in a humble tone. You almost never see it. And honestly, anybody who's ever seen the face of Victor Von Doom and they weren't supposed to, well, by and large, the fate that befalls them is usually worse than death. But it's his way of telling her, I mean what I am saying. For him, it's bearing his soul, the thing he's the most embarrassed by. And he says, no, it isn't. Not completely. Don't you see? If it were, you would be like all the others, too repelled to even glance at me. And he says, you still have feelings for me, embers that could burn brightly given the chance. And so what's starting to happen here is that exterior layer, that hardened shell, is starting to soften because she says, I have a life beyond yours. And Victor says, yes, one that no longer need be ruled by fear. And so she tells him, right, there is a difference in you, your armor. And the response of Victor, a mechanical device, a symbol of the technology I henceforth reject. This is not an offer made lightly, Valeria. I am prepared to renounce science in all its forms if you will take my hand, if you will save me. And so she just kind of looks down at the locket and then looks back at Victor and ultimately says, yes. Right? Not necessarily directly. She says, I'm so confused. This is not at all what I expected from you. I cannot promise anything, Victor. We have so much more to discuss. And Victor says, understood. Just tell me that there is a chance for us. And she says, certainly. And that's when the trap gets sprung. It's crazy. At that point, like this just spell erupts out of nowhere. And she was like, what's happening here? And Victor just says, my life is changing. And he says, when I was young, I made a faithful choice. I chose science over sorcery, and I want to choose again. And he says, thus I made a pact. I conjured a cabal of nether demons who claimed they would make me the magician I could have been, and greater besides. But as is too often true of demons, there was a barter involved. One condition. I had to sacrifice something of indescribable value, something irreplaceable, something only you could give me. And he just says, farewell, my love. And Valeria dies. At that point, her skin becomes his new armor. And he says, dear Valeria, I will miss you more than you will ever imagine, but I will always hold you close to me. It's twisted, man. It is so twisted. I sprung that guys on you. I sprung that on you guys so well. I sprung that on you guys so fast. You guys had no clue what was going on. And so at that point, you switch over to the Fantastic Four, right? Who are just kind of doing Fantastic Four things. But what's going on here is Reed Richards is just kind of experimenting with a ray gun, kind of an anti-Ben gun, that sort of thing, right? Constantly experimenting with the idea of figuring out a way to turn Ben Grimm back into being a human. What makes this important is that there's a point where Valeria Richards is playing by herself. Now, lest we forget here, Victor Von Doom is essentially the godfather of Valeria. He's the reason why she was even born in the first place, right? Why he was able to help Susan Storm conceive Valeria. And so ever since then, she's always been under his protection. Woe betide the poor soul that brings harm to Valeria Richards, including Doom himself, as we just saw in the conclusion to One World Under Doom. But while she's playing with her toys, Victor conjures a magical incantation and appears to Valeria, and he says, hello, Valeria, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Victor Von Doom. I am your godfather, at least so I consider myself. After all, it was only I, only Doom, who possessed both the knowledge and the skill to see your mother through childbirth. And he says, when a baby is born of parents empowered by radiation the way yours are, there can be complications. And so he says, once before, years ago, your father was called upon to compensate for such difficulties in a moment of crisis, and failed. Because of his pitiable ineptitude, your mother suffered a miscarriage. Consequently, when the hour of your birth was upon us, and Richard's elsewhere, your Uncle Jonathan turned to me for aid, his enemy, gambling in all likelihood that I could not pass up the certainty of succeeding where your father blundered. No matter, I asked in return only to be allowed to name you Valeria after someone close to me. And he says, when I delivered you, I realized what a gift your birth was to me, how it might finally provide me with a method by which to at least avenge myself against the indignities that your family has visited upon me. The moment you appeared, when I first held you in my armored hands, I whispered a series of incantations and spells that forever bound us. Despite your parents' most fervent hopes and dreams, Valeria, you are no ordinary child. In the parlance of the occult, you are my familiar, my eyes and ears, an extension of my senses, a circuit for sorcery. On the day you were born, I placed you under my royal protection. I vowed no harm would ever come to you, but I made no such guarantees to those idiotic enough to hold you to their breast. Trust me, Valeria, by end's day, your father will no longer be alive to mold you with his simplistic touch. It is best for you. Remember, this is his handiwork. And so in turn, he just says, let it begin. And at that moment, everything goes sideways for the Fantastic Four because the ray gun activates of its own accord. It's not supposed to. And literally, Franklin Richards gets snatched up. And where they're trying to figure out a way to save him, a portal opens from hell and grabs Franklin and drags him in to the realm of hell itself. He's literally carried away by demons. Now, of course, Johnny goes to try to reach for him, but Johnny's not able to save Franklin, and neither is Reed. Not only that, because we're dealing with hellfire here, an extremely potent form of energy, it burns Johnny's storm. So Johnny's kind of recovering from his burn. Susan and Ben show up with Valeria in tow, what in the world is going on here, right? And that's where Reed's just I can get him back, right? I can get our son back. And Susan's what are you talking about? You can get our son. Tell me what happened. Where's my child, Reed? What have you done? And that's where things get interesting, because prior to all this popping off, when Ben and Susan were just trying to see if they could get Valeria to speak her first word was doom, a word she spoke after Doom had communicated with her using magic. Ben Grimm thinks about that and he realizes what's going on. And he just says, Doom. And that's where Reed is are you sure? And he just says, it's what Val said. And he says right out of her lips, his name, clear as a bell. This is not his MO, but that is no coincidence. So what does any of it mean? And that's where Reed looks at Valeria and he says, it means he's here. And he says, it means he's watching us. He's watching us right now. And Susan's what are you talking about? And he just says, blue, Susan. Val's eyes are blue, but in this instance, they have changed. And so Reed just starts shaking her, right? Leave my child alone. Everybody thinks he's gone nuts, right? Show yourself, right? You are a coward hiding behind a child. And Doom just says, soon enough, Richards, soon enough. And so at that point, you jump back to Dr. Doom. I told you guys this story was amazing. You jump back to Dr. Doom meeting with the Haazareth 3. Now, it is important to know this is the first time they're introduced in Marvel Comics, and they're really just kind of a core element of this story, because Doom kind of talks about how his methods are pretty intense now, but you also kind of get the nature of what it means for Doom to make a deal with them, because the Haazareth say, we are quite pleased that you came to us, Victor. Even in the Netherworld, your reputation precedes you. We were wise to bargain with you, but we must say we find the sacrifice you offered in exchange quite equitable and palatable. Beyond that, you owe us nothing more than acknowledgement. Having an Earth agent is good for our reputation. Do not forget that you could not have done all of this without us. And that's what's really interesting, is Doom is still prideful, and he says, mind your words, right? Doom sees you as an ally, but he does not see you as masters. And at that point, they're just kind of of course, we're allies here. We're all working on the same side. And so because this is the action of Dr. Doom, it leads to the Fantastic Four traveling to Latveria in order to confront Dr. Doom. It's the only thing they know to do. But along the way, Ben Grimm contacts Doctor Strange to kind of warn him of the fact that Dr. Doom is engaging in some new level of sorcery that he seemingly didn't have before, which is true. He's got a power boost now. And so, of course, when they're talking to Stephen Strange dismisses it. Oh, it's no concern. It's fine. But I am glad that you told me about this, right? Doom knows my abilities and knowledge rival any he could amass. Still, by employing a sufficiently arcane cloaking incantation, he could have taken even me by surprise with a demonic assault. thank you for warning me, goodbye. Because Doom's already done it. He's already launched his attack against Stephen Strange. And it's the smartest move, right? If you are a person like Dr. Doom and you're looking for a power boost in the realm of sorcery, the first person you move off the board, the first piece you get rid of is the Sorcerer Supreme, because he's going to notice and he's going to come asking questions, especially considering the close relationship that Victor and Stephen Strange have had ever since the Triumph and Torment storyline, when they both went to hell to free Cynthia Von Doom's soul. The problem is that when the Fantastic Four are flying into Latveria, basically there's like an anti-technology incantation. They end up crash landing and they confront Dr. Doom. And here's the crazy thing. Susan Storm fires off her force fields. Dr. Doom literally just sends them flying around himself, so she's powerless in the face of everything that he can do now. Johnny Storm goes to launch an attack, and Victor turns his attack into snow. Ben Grimm goes running at Victor Von Doom to punch him, and Victor forces Reed to switch places with him, literally teleports Reed into the path of Doom. Nothing they are doing is working, and they are getting completely overwhelmed. And so in that moment, Reed has an idea, right? Reed says, I don't care what type of power Doom is using, you can call it magic if you want to, it still has to come from somewhere, right? And that's where Ben is like, block the source. And Reed says, exactly, an electromagnetic pulse set to the proper frequency will interrupt every form of energy that I know of short of gravity and demolish any circuitry he's got concealed beneath that new armor. And so when Reed goes to fire it off, it doesn't work, right? All the other members of the Fantastic Four go in for the attack while Reed fires off this shot, and it doesn't make any difference whatsoever. It looks like it does. They start to get the upper hand on Doom, right? Like they're forcing him to retreat. They're clearly crushing this guy. But again, none of it matters, because at that point, Susan looks to Reed and she's like, what is this? And he says, it's a makeshift EMP generator. So much for Victor's dismissal of technology. And that's where Johnny's like, what is he talking about? And Susan just says, Reed, no, like, you're seeing what Doom wants you to see. We have not launched a successful attack against him. Look at this thing, right? It's literally just a bunch of gobbledygook in his hands, right? Arbitrary tools, bones and eyes and things like that. And that's what they say. Doom's faking the whole thing. And Doom just says, and yet my disappointment in your brother-in-law is genuine. Leopards and their spots. You remain a silicon relic in a post-electronic world, Richards, my world. And he says, Jonathan was correct. You might as well have been shining a flashlight. Do you honestly believe you could render me powerless? And he just says, this is powerless, and strips the Fantastic Four's powers away from them all, reverts them back to just being regular, normal humans. Then he takes Valeria away from Ben Grimm and then just starts mocking everybody. And so in the face of that, he forces Reed Richards to make a choice. He tells him, what I want from you more than anything else is I want to hear you acquiesce. I want to hear you admit defeat. Ben Grimm, right, is like the last man standing with any abilities whatsoever. Dr. Doom summons a whole bunch of mindless ones from the dimension of Dormammu and just has them start attacking Ben Grimm. And so with everybody essentially incapacitated, he shows them Franklin Richards trapped in hell. And he says, know when you're beaten, Richards, surrender. And he says, surrender and I will release your child. On that, you have the solemn word of Doom, who always honors his promises. You know this. And Ben tells Reed, like, do not surrender here. And Ben says, no, those are my terms. You really have no choice but to acquiesce, unless, of course, the legendary genius of Reed Richards can concoct some plan to extract victory from this, where your friends are getting pummeled, your child's locked in hell, and I have your daughter. What's it gonna be? And ultimately, Reed surrenders. And so in that moment, everyone gets released by Dr. Doom, and then they're taken back to Latveria. And what Dr. Doom is doing is he returned their powers to them, but he switched them around. So at this point, Johnny Storm has the power of Reed Richards. Susan Storm has the powers of Johnny. And Ben Grimm is literally just being tortured, right? He just started screwing with everybody. And so at that point, he goes to visit Reed, who he has locked in a room somewhere. And Reed just asks him, right, like, this room, why am I here, Victor? And Doom just says, because I am a better man than you. He says, Mr. Mr. Fantastic, that you chose that name for yourself says it all. Your problem, Richards, is your unquenchable vanity. You are the center of your universe, and your unmitigated arrogance, you carry around an eternal sense of entitlement that is wholly undeserved, and yet so fundamental to your sense of self that you are constantly willing to put everyone around you at risk to attain whatever goals strike your fancy. And the sad truth is that arrogance is a mask. While it is intended to be a symbol of strength, in reality, it hides a fundamental and profoundly well-deserved insecurity regarding your allegedly superior intelligence, i.e., you're not nearly as smart as you think you are, because if you really were that smart, I would not have gotten the upper hand on you. And he says all the glamour and excitement that is the Fantastic Four exists and has always existed solely to remind others that you think you are smarter than everybody else, but you are not. And he says, why are you in there, in that room? Because before I appoint myself the emperor of this undeserving mudball, my sense of honor compels me to grant you a chance that you would never grant me. In there are all the tools that you require to learn what I already know about magic and sorcery. And I will be honest, this is only slightly more fair than handing a roadmap to a lost dog. And I have every confidence that this opportunity will make you no more worthy an opponent than you are now. And he says, whatever future you have in this world is an exercise in abject humiliation. After all this time, I am entitled to my entertainment. And he says, this door can be opened by an enchantment that a 4-year-old could learn. Whenever you think you are ready to face me, come find me and take your time. Though were my child burning in the fires of hell, I would hurry, because Reed is in this gigantic library of spells. It's his weakness. And in fact, he starts to get frustrated over all of this because Reed is a man of science. He's a man of hard logic. In fact, 2 + 2 = 4. It's as true as it was when that concept was first invented, and it will be true forevermore. But when you're talking about magic and sorcery, it doesn't work that way. And it's actually one of the coolest things because Reed starts to get so frustrated by all these books, he grabs one of them and just like throws it on the ground, right? And then suddenly this spell starts coming out of one of the candles that gets knocked over, written in fire, and it just says, knowledge isn't everything. And so Reed, trying to understand what's going on, the books all kind of start going haywire of their own accord, fanning around, flipping around, and a hand reaches out of one of them, and it's Doctor Strange in his spirit form. He's kind of speaking in broken English, but the long and short of it is, Reed, can you hear me? Right? Like, speak the words that will release me. And Reed kind of starts to figure it out, right? He says the incantation, and then he speaks it, and Stephen Strange emerges from the books in a spirit form. And with that being the case, now Reed has an ally. It's not enough for him to learn everything that there is here, but it is enough for him to gain a bigger picture of what's happening here. Because initially he's kind of approaching it all from a logical standpoint. Okay, Stephen, well, now that your spirit is back, we need your body, right? Go find your body. And he's just kind of like, look, my body wouldn't really do us any benefit here, right? We need to get back to my sanctum sanctorum, and we have to figure out what all is happening because Doctor Strange is as much of a victim as anybody else. He knows hardly nothing about what's transpiring here. He was kind of attacked out of the blue. And so now he's got to figure out what's going on so he can give the answers to Reed Richards so Reed can figure out what's going on. But the issue here is he says, when they're messing with the spells, not here, right? Doom could sense my presence at any moment. My sanctum, right? This scroll contains a rudimentary teleportation spell that can take us there. And Reed starts looking at it from an analytical perspective, right? Like there's a symmetrical exactitude to the hand gestures, but that's where Strange says there doesn't need to be. Merely hold them steady. Speak the enchantment as written, and most of all, and Reed just kind of ignores them, right? It's like a formula, right? It's just like a formula. It's a mathematical proof, right? I can do this, and then just suddenly starts casting spells willy-nilly and teleports them to New York, right, to the Sanctum Sanctorum, about 70 yards away, right? And in turn, like, they almost get hit by a car, right? Now, of course, he was able to pull off the teleportation spell, but this goes to the bigger point, that Reed asks what went wrong, and Stephen says, you did, by about 70 yards. We should have materialized inside my sanctum, where we shall continue your education, provided Doom's goblins haven't destroyed everything. But he kind of goes on to explain what went on. He says, you were precise, Reed, and therein lies lies the challenge. True knowledge of the mystic arts is not about exactitude and control. Magic is about realizing your place within a grander scheme. And so that's where he kind of starts figuring out what's happening, and he recognizes that the Haazareth 3 have made a deal with Doctor Doom. And it's no small thing that basically he concocted a bargain with them. And where Reed doesn't necessarily understand initially what it means, that basically Stephen Strange says he did it so that he could kind of abandon the idea of him basically using science, and instead, the power he has now is the power he would have had he never focused on science, and instead dedicated all of his time to sorcery. He is astronomically powerful. And when Reed asks, like, what's the whole point of making a bargain with the Haazareth 3, right? The Stephen says, every bit of darkness Doom spreads brings them a perverse glee. Beyond that, all they demand is that Doom not forget that he is in their debt, and that is unlikely. Now, of course, they do recognize that Reed and Strange are watching them, but honestly, they don't really much care. They're just kind of having too much fun tormenting Franklin Richards. Because lest we forget, at this point in Franklin Richards' life, he doesn't have access to his powers, like mental blocks, powers burning out. This is the era in Marvel where Franklin was largely just kind of removed from the total amount of power he traditionally has. And so under the guidance of Stephen Strange, Reed Richards constructs a pentagram, the idea that he's trying to free his friends and family and return their powers to their proper bodies. But again, he's focusing too much on the analytical side. That's why he says, right, it's not working, I'm torturing them. And Stephen just says, then listen more carefully and don't torture them. He says, I realize you are overwrought, but you must put aside your analytical nature if you are to learn anything. And Reed, again, is just kind of like, why isn't this written more clearly? How am I supposed to master this? And that's where Strange says, stop saying that. This is not an endeavor for know-it-alls. How magic works is not nearly as important as that it works. There are forces beyond our ken. I realize that it is in your nature to question them. Don't. Accept their existence. Do not attempt to force them to fit into yours. Now, try again. And that's where they keep messing with this magic, and Doom starts to realize what's going on. He picks up on what's happening. So time is running short because Reed is, again, hyper-fixating, right? It's like a person in their 40s or 50s that just doesn't understand why a positive times a negative equals a negative. There should be some kind of logic that exists there, but the reality is that's just how it is. Just accept that as a truth and go forward from there. Stop focusing too much. And Reed can't do that. And so that's why Stephen just says words, right? You can continue to say that you cannot understand, but you don't honestly believe it to be true. And he says, at heart, you will not accept that there are things Reed Richards can never know. Reed, you're working with energies and forces and deities outside of your comprehension, and they have some say in that exchange, and they will not respond to you until you remove your ego from that equation. And Reed just says, like, I'm trying. And Stephen is like, and you're failing, right? That's an important distinction to understand here. When it comes to the powers of Stephen Strange, he derives a bulk of his abilities from the Vishanti, right? A trio of some of the most magical beings in existence, a level of power that is only rivaled by the highest of cosmic entities. But they're still sentient beings nonetheless. They lend that power to Stephen Strange. When he channels the power of Sidorak or Zom or anybody out there, they lend those abilities to the person trying to wield it. But they will not offer those abilities to a person who doesn't respect their existence enough to even acknowledge the fact that they are real. And that's why Reed is struggling. Because once Dr. Doom latches on to what's happening, at that moment, Stephen is like, he knows, right? He says, he's coming. We are out of time. And stealth is no longer an advantage. And he just says, here. And he just like gives this device to Reed Richards. And Reed is like, what is this? And Stephen's just like, your only hope. And at that point, he's yanked away by Doctor Strange. And so in that moment, Reed is literally fumbling with this magical artifact. He has no idea how it works. And he's just like magic words, right? Abracadabra, right? I mean, Doctor Strange has been whisked off to hell alongside Franklin, so he's being tortured. And so Reed's just like, operate, right? Do something. Come on. He's like, nothing. I cannot make it function. And he's like, I am an idiot. And the thing activates. Right? So it was a magical device designed to basically operate for a person who's incapable of using magic in any meaningful way. And so at that point, Dr. Doom arrives in New York to confront Reed Richards within the Sanctum Sanctorum. And Reed's just kind of like, okay, so where's the trigger? I see no exterior switch and no wired relay. I can't figure it out. And at fires off yet again and fixes this vase that had been destroyed. And that's where Reed's just like, okay, cool. So my incompetence with regards to magic is the way in which I control this, right? And so at that point, Doom goes to confront Reed. And Reed, using this device, has summoned the rest of the Fantastic Four and restored their powers to them. And at that point, it's a knockdown, drag-out fight throughout the city of New York. Valeria's taken to like a daycare center, right? Keep an eye on her. She's been through a lot. We'll be back here in a little bit. Everyone knows who the Fantastic Four is, so it's not like they're going to like kidnap Valeria and hold her for ransom or anything like that. So it's like, okay, cool, right? We'll keep an eye on your kid. And so at that point, the fight is on. And so using a combination of magic and technology, Reed Richards and the Fantastic Four are able to start overcoming Dr. Doom. And that's a cool thing, right? Reed Richards says, you are insane to hold out on us at this point, Victor. There is no telling what this talisman could do to you. It's completely beyond me. And he says, since I deduce the magic phrase that unlocks the power when it comes to sorcery, I am an imbecile, a fool, a chimp. And literally every time he makes this statement, it hits Dr. Doom with more and more power. And he just says, you're being kind. And he says, as for the rest of you, you've seen weeds burst through weathered pavement, I am sure. I can't imagine it's a painless process. At least, I certainly hope not. And like binds them to a wall and just has like all these plants start growing out of Ben Grimm. And so in that moment, he realizes Johnny Storm's gone. And that's when he figures out Susan Storm had made Johnny invisible. And he just says, unacceptable, reveal Johnny Storm. Johnny pops up right next to Dr. Doom and pummels this guy. Literally lets off a massive burst of energy. He goes Nova. Now the whole thing is like contained within a force field by Susan Storm, so it doesn't obliterate the whole of New York. And of course, the other members of the Fantastic Four are protected as well. And that's where Doom is just like, that was your best. And he says, I suppose that one was never much of a threat. And where Reed goes to speak, Doom is like, silence, and binds his mouth. And he says, a true magician would be embarrassed by the concept of magic words. What now, Richards, right? You'll saw me in half, or would you rather I pick a card, right? Just kind of taunting him. And Reed Richards, without speaking a spell, uses the device to blast Dr. Doom and sends this guy flying. And so while Dr. Doom is recovering, Reed's like, here's what we're going to do. Because keep in mind, everything that has been said up to this point. This is going to be important. So Reed Richards ends up confronting Dr. Doom along with the rest of the Fantastic Four within Stephen's Sanctorum. And he says, I overestimated you, Victor. You are of no use to me. I need my son and you cannot retrieve him. You don't have the power to do so, right? Basically toying with Doom's ego. And Doom is just kind of like, you are a cretin, right? You have no idea what my limits are. So Reed's clearly goading him on. And he just says, I know better than you, because you're too arrogant to recognize them. You were right about one thing, Victor. The realm of the supernatural is a vast tapestry, but you see yourself as the needle and the thread, and nothing could be further from the truth. And he just says, I pity you, right? You will never be more than a mid-level magician. Your pride cripples you. And where Doom tells him, right, it's lies, right, ignorant lies, Reed says, no, right, Stephen was right. You'll never rise above mediocrity. Never. Not until you admit that you answer to resources greater than yourself, that you are obliged to superior forces. And Doom is like, unthinkable, right? There was only one Doom and I answer to nobody. And that's where Reed says, and that you owe your accomplishments to them. And so at that point, he goads Doom successfully because Doom says, no, I am indebted to no one at all. Now, what did Stephen say? That the only thing the Haazareth trio want is for Doom to acknowledge that he is in debt to them. By failing to acknowledge it, now he's ensnared. Literally, he fell into the trap. Hook, line, singer, right? Ha! Got him! Like, that's literally what happened here. And so at that point, Dr. Doom is whisked off to hell by the Haazareth 3. And so that, of course, leads to Reed and Johnny and Susan grabbing Franklin Richards along with Doctor Strange and trying to get them out. Here's the crazy thing. There's a point where Dr. Doom is literally being drug away by the Haazareth trio. And that's where he just like begs Reed Richards, right? Like, Richards, please help me. All those years ago, you tried to save me. I should have listened to you. I am sorry. And Reed is just like, you're lying, right? He says, you don't think that I know you by now? After all the misery and pain that you've caused us over the years, ever since the day we met, Victor, all you have ever wanted was for me to live in the shadow of your genius. But I swear to you that I will spend the rest of my life forgetting you. And that's where Doom is just like, think again, and grabs Reed Richards' face. At that point, you jump back to the Sanctum where basically everybody's been rescued. Reed is pulled out of the portal with the help of Ben Grimm. And they kind of talk about the idea that like Dr. Doom has been defeated, right? He's gone, right? And that's where Reed is just like, we had one last encounter. And that's where you find out that what Dr. Doom had done is when he had touched the face of Reed Richards, he had melted half of his face, which of course this goes into Reed Richards traveling to the realm of the one above all in the form of Jack Kirby and having his face fixed. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. I told you it's a phenomenal story and you would recognize a lot of moments in it. Thank you all for watching and I will catch you all later. Peace.